down to the shore to wait for him. But as darkness fell and Jesus still hadn't come back, they got into the boat and headed across the lake towards Capernaum. Soon a gale swept down upon them and the sea grew very rough. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they see Jesus walking on the water towards the boat. They were terrified. But he called out to them, "Don't be afraid, I am here." Then they were eager to let him in the boat, and immediately he arrived at their destination. It's a lot different than the other ones, hey? Immediately he arrived at their destination. I want to start out with that first scene. It sets it up right after Pastor Darren's sermon last week. Jesus has just fed the 5,000, and in the other Gospels, everybody is so excited, and Jesus just wants to spend a little more time with them. So he says to the disciples, go on back home, which is like get in the boat, go 8 miles down, and I'm just going to say goodbye to these 5,000 people. In John, though, it's a totally different view. The people have loved the sign of the feeding so much that they're like, we're going to make that guy king. That guy's going to do stuff for us that no king has ever done. We want to make him king. And so, the way that John perceives it is Jesus feels the pressure and he escapes to be alone. And so he's alone, the crowd doesn't really know where he is, and they see the disciples, and the disciples are waiting for Jesus, and finally, the disciples decide, I think Jesus told them, the other Gospels tell them that Jesus said, hey, go on. They get in the boat and they leave. Now think about that. This is not the 21st century. This is AD 30. There's no Uber. He doesn't have a car. No cell phone. These disciples make a faith statement here. This is the faith statement. Jesus told us to go. We're his followers. Like, he's the guy we follow. But we're going to get on a boat. Not knowing how Jesus is going to meet us, but he's going to find us. Jesus is going to find us. And so, John starts off right away, giving us the focus of the story. The focus of the story is the disciples. This is a very private miracle today. The disciples and Jesus. And it starts off with the disciples saying, Jesus will find us, let's get on the boat, let's get on the road, let's get on the water. And it makes me think that sometimes we need to live expecting that Jesus will show up. We need to live knowing that soon Jesus will show up. That's simple faith. And so these disciples get in the boat, not knowing how Jesus is going to get to them, not knowing what's going to be done, and they just go down. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could live a little bit like that? And so the story continues. This is the part that we all know. They're in the vessel. Jesus is not in it yet, so there's no in the storming yet. There's no smiling yet. And the storm gets crazy. I tried to look it up to see like what the most recent storming was like in the Sea of Galilee. It does storm there sporadically. It's a very small lake, and small lakes don't have huge waves. But every now and then, they'll have waves that are like 4 to 6 feet tall. With record waves, the last recorded highest waves were in the late 90s, over 10 feet tall. Now, we live in California, so we know what waves are like, okay? I did not know what waves were really like until I moved to California. And I remember when I first brought my youth group to the beach, okay? You go out to the beach and you see the waves and you're like, I'm living a dream come true. If you have never been to Canada, you heard it all from Robin. It's just cold. No waves. I'm actually really excited for the next sermon series, hey, the 7 Signs of Rob. It's gonna be good. And so, we arrive, our youth group arrives at the lake, and like the beach is so good, and I tell the kids like, hey, I'm no lifeguard, so just like try to swim to your ability, okay? Like, if you feel like you can't handle the waves, like, don't go in the waves. Like, I think it's very common sense, right? But without fail, every single time we go out, Mr. Real knows too, when he takes kids to the beach, kids go out, and then like the really like good swimmers are like swimming out into the waves, doing the whole like, when the wave comes and they like swim in, and they're like looking like pros, and everybody's going out there having a good time. And as I'm out there with the eventually, in some people's faces, you see the beginning of like worry. Because they're like paddling, and then maybe in their mind they're thinking, I don't know if I can do this for much longer. And then the waves hit, and they get hit by one, and the next one comes, and then it turns from like worry to panic to fear. And I see their eyes, and their eyes lock into mine, and I'm like, I probably should help them, but I'm thinking the same thing. Like, trying to just keep up with my youth group. What's nice though about the beach is if you get really tired, just give up, and like it sends you ashore. Right? It just sends you ashore, and then you're like safe on ground. In this story, though, these guys are 3 to 4 miles in the middle of the water, and obviously it's a huge winds. They can't use the sails, and they're in this boat, which we actually know the dimensions of fishing boats at that time: 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, 4.5 feet deep, with waves, I'm guessing, in the 6 to 10 range. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced fisherman, the odds don't look fun. And so these guys are rowing and rowing and rowing. The other Gospels tell us the time, this one doesn't. Matthew tells us at the 4th watch, at 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, they've been rowing exhaustedly. But I like to think that the disciples have something in their mind. They're living, expecting that Jesus will show up. And so they're paddling, they feel like they're gonna die, but maybe Jesus will show up. So in verse 19 it says, they had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the water towards the boat. They were terrified. Honest, John's an honest writer. But one thing that I like that none of the English translations get is for John, as he's writing this years and years later, it's a present moment. He actually switches to the present tense. He says, and while they were rowing, they see Jesus. He feels it because in that moment, he sees Jesus and it's nothing like he would ever expect Jesus to show up. He's expecting Jesus, but the way that Jesus shows up, it's not anything like he expects. What does that mean for us? 2 things. The first thing is that we need to expect the difficult life. So the first thing we said is we've got to expect that Jesus will show up. But the second thing is we've got to expect that life will be difficult. Almost all of us will have trials. And in getting to know some of you older people at the church, I actually think the older you get, the chances of trials increase. The more older and experienced you get, the more opportunities there are for hurt, for failure, for sickness, for pain. So we've got to live holding these 2 things. Expecting that Jesus will show up, and expecting the difficult life. But when those meet, when Jesus does show up in our difficult circumstances, this is the one thing I love about God. It will always be a surprise. It will always be how we don't expect it. And so sometimes I think we need to approach our views on the future with a little bit of uncertainty and surprise. Because sometimes when we pray, we say, God, this is a difficult situation. Could you either open the door or close the door? And God's sneaking in through the window. Always how we don't expect. And so in this passage, the disciples who are waiting for Jesus to come save the day, when Jesus arrives to save the day, they don't notice him. They're terrified. But Jesus reaches out to them in verse 20. Jesus calls out to them, don't be afraid. I am here. Now, some of your translations might say, it is I, don't be afraid. I want to go to the Greek. I'm not a Greek scholar, you're not a Greek scholar, so we're all good. All right. In the Greek, it's this, ego eimi. Can you try to say that with me? Ego eimi. Yeah, ego comes from, that's where we get the Latin ego, right? It means me, I, okay? A me is the verb to be. Like, like to be or not to be, like that's a me. Shakespeare would have said, a me? That's the only word I know. That's it. But let me give you some facts on that Greek word. It's the verb, present, active, indicative, first person singular. So in English, we usually will say like, I am tired. In the Greek, you don't need to say I. Instead of saying ego, I, tired, I should have really looked this up. Instead of saying ego, me, tired, all you would say in the Greek is this, me, tired. Because in me, it tells you that it's a first person, okay, singular, of the present verb. All in that. So in normal English, you don't say that. But John uses ego, me 11 times in his book. And he uses it on purpose because in their Greek Bibles, which is what they were reading, in 300 BC, the Hebrew text was translated into Greek. So a lot of priests and teachers were using the Greek Septuagint, right? And in Exodus 3, when Moses is being called by God to reach and enslave people, Moses says, well, what's your name? Like, they're going to ask, like, which God? And he says this, ego eimi. I am the name of God. And so Jesus pulls up by this boat, and this is what he says, in the literal sense in Greek, ego eimi, fear not. 4 words. And in that, he makes this grand statement, I am the God before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, ego eimi. I'm beside the boat right now. Don't be afraid. This is really important at this point in the Gospel of John, because this is the second time he uses it, okay? The second time he uses it, and every time after this, our famous text you all know. I am the bread of the life. I am the light of the world. I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. Ego eimi this. God, through John, is declaring who he is. And he's by the boat, and he says these 2 words, and for all the people in that boat, in an instant they understand what Jesus is saying. God has arrived. I have arrived. And so, John takes a turn where the other Gospels take another turn. I'll tell you how Matthew and Mark do it, okay? Matthew has Peter, the little scoundrel, wanting to like make this a moment too for him. So he gets out there, he's like, let me walk, like I can do this. And so he goes out there and the storm gets crazy and he falls and Jesus says, oh, you little faith, why did you doubt? And in there's a little hint of like, the disciples weren't there yet. The disciples are on their path to understanding God, but they're not there yet. Okay, in Mark's gospel, Jesus gets in the boat. It doesn't even mention an invitation. Jesus just gets in the boat. He calms everything. It gets calm, and instead of the disciples rejoicing, they are afraid. They are afraid, and Mark uses another term from the Septuagint. Their hearts were hardened. Like that's the same language that happened to Pharaoh. Their hearts were hardened. They saw the sign, but they couldn't really get it. And so in these 2, in Matthew and Mark, we see the picture of disciples who are on their path toward Jesus, but they still have a long ways to go. But John isn't here to tell the story of they have a long way to go, but God is great. We can step out in faith and God will rescue us. That's not John's point of view. John's point of view is, what does it mean for us to have a relationship with ego, with I am? And so, as soon as they hear the words from Jesus' mouth, this is what the Bible says in verse 21. They were eager to let him in the boats, and immediately they arrived at their destination. Immediately they arrived. Maybe this is a miracle of teleportation. Maybe the storm was so crazy that when the storm finally subsided, they're like, oh, the shore's right there. Whatever the case is, John is not concerned about the storm. He is concerned with the fact that when they said, Jesus, come in, they arrived. When they had their trial, which we were expecting, expect trials, expect a hard life, but expect that Jesus will come. When they met, Jesus came in their trials, they arrived. And so this is what I think it means for us. Live expecting presence, not perfection. Live expecting presence, not perfection. Because it's easy, and obviously the other gospels are good, or we're just comparing, right? This is called a synoptic comparison, right? In the gospel of Matthew, it's easy to say I really believe in God, but sometimes my faith is just not strong enough. I got more work to do. In the Gospel of Matthew, it's easy to say man, I love who God is, but I just I'm so confused about some things. In the Gospel of John, all you gotta say is, that Jesus guy, that's God. I'm still gonna expect trials, but God's still gonna show up. And his presence is all that I need. Nothing else. And this is easy to say and hard to practice, because this is in direct comparison, a direct foil to what is happening with the feeding of the 5,000. Because the feeding of the 5,000 just happened, this whole thing is happening in the ocean, and when morning hits on the shore, those that remain, the multitude, John talks about this, others don't talk about this, the multitude say, that guy who gave us all that food, where is he? The guy who gave us all that bread, where is he? We know he didn't get on the boat, because they're looking for Jesus. They want the next sign. They want the next miracle. But the boat is gone. So you know what they do? They see some boats on the shore, they call them over, and they pack themselves into these boats, and the boats head over for Capernaum. The boats arrive at Capernaum, and they say Jesus and his disciples. And the multitude goes up to Jesus, and they say, where were you? Instead of answering the question, Jesus says, you're just looking for the next sign. You're just looking for the next thing. And they even say, yeah, we want that, manna from heaven. They make the multitude makes a reference to Exodus now. They say, we want that manna that comes from heaven. Give us that every single day. Jesus says, it's here. I am. And go to me. I am the bread of life. And they don't get it. Many leave him. Many leave him. Because for them, presence was not enough. Not only did the multitude want the presence of Jesus, they wanted the presence of Jesus and the daily miracles, the daily improvement, the always getting better. The disciples didn't need that. Come. They're really happy, and this is what John says, we arrived. Doesn't matter what other storms come in, doesn't matter what difficulties I face, Jesus is going to keep showing up, so I've arrived. There's nothing else I need. And I think it's really important for us as Christians to hold these together, because whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a strong believer or still a baby believer, life will keep getting harder. And it is our faith that calls us to expect Jesus to arrive. And when he does, say, problem doesn't have to be solved, I'm just happy with God.